Okay, let's start recording. All right, so let's just recap on what we have done yesterday, right? So we have started on a new chapter, which is project planning. So project planning is a lengthy chapter. Okay, so we will start with theoretical as such, what is planning and who plans, what are the types of planning that we do. And then we will move on to basically in terms of scheduling. Okay, so we will actually move on in terms of, hold on, in terms of scheduling, whereby you will be introduced to CPM. Okay, so but we will not go into CPM. I suppose you have done CPM during your diploma, but we move on to something called precedence diagram, which is a more flexible method as compared to CPM. Okay, so probably by then you should be able to know the different relationship that exists in construction project. Okay, so for CPM, your relationship finish to start je, which means activity A finish, activity B start, activity B finish, activity C start. But in reality, we cannot just depend on finish to start relationship. You will come across relationship whereby two activities supposed to start together, or two activities starting together but with a certain days of lag. Okay, so those are the things you need to know, so that when you basically utilize Microsoft Project ke Primavera, you should be able to understand the fundamentals of dia punya detailing tu. So what are the different type of relationship and so on. Okay, but however, before we go on to all those calculations, so the theoretical part will be as such in terms of planning. Okay, this one I think is quite clear. Okay, so the planning, when you are trying to do a planning, there are several questions that you need to answer. Okay, so the activities, the method you're going to use, you might have several options in hand, so you would choose a method which depends on your priority. If you want something fast, maybe you choose a method which could expedite your work. Or if you want something economical, maybe time is not an issue, then you want something which is cheap. Okay, so that depends on the priority that you have. So and other things. Okay, so you need to schedule the time, the cost, and the human resource. Okay, and then moving into construction management. Okay, so who plans? Basically all parties plan, but in general you can say the client plans, the designer plans, and the contractor plans, and the more detailed planning will be done by the contractor. So a more general planning will be done by the client. Cuma client, the time spent is longer than contractor. Okay, so you should be aware of that. And then construction planning, so this is just brief descriptions of it. And importantly, you need to know there are several levels of planning. Okay, so for client, we call it project planning. So the client would plan basically the entire spectrum of the project, starting from the beginning until the end. And then you have pre-tender planning done by the tendering contractors. So whoever contractor who are planning to tender for a project, biasanya dia ada time frame for them to actually come up with the tender document. And then we have pre-contract planning. So it is done by the main contractor who has won over the contract. Okay, so from the time of contract award until the time before starting on the site. Okay, so you have a time period where you need to plan. So it is not like you get the contract today, you jump on the site tomorrow. So dia tak macam tu. So at least 14 days whereby you need to plan carefully what will be your proper schedule and where you need to engage which subcontractor and so on. Okay, so project pre-contract planning. And contract planning is once you start on the site. Okay, so you occupy the site until completion. So basically until developability period. Okay, all right. So and then so these are the details of project planning. I think it's quite clear, clearly explained. Pre-tender planning, and then you have pre-contract planning, and I think I did explain briefly in terms of contract planning. So we will start from here today. Okay. So Any question? Okay, so if there is none, then we'll continue with contract planning. Okay, so contract planning is basically a planning done by the main contractor with the help of subcontractor. Why? Because you need to know what are the resources within the subcontractor and when are they able to cope up with the job. Okay, so if you, as a main contractor, if you do not get the input from subcontractor and their suppliers, it is like you buat planning shot sendiri. Okay, you want everything to be optimistic and as what you have wanted, but in reality on site it is not as what you have planned for. Okay, so it is actually important when you come up with this contract planning or basically short-term planning, you need to engage the provider at the end of your cycle, to at the end of your apa tu, the length tu. Okay, so your subcontractor who does the job. Okay, and your subcontractor basically gets the information look based on their site supervisor, based on their workers, because sometimes you might be too optimistic completing the completion of certain reinforcement bar for certain elements optimistically, but in reality that is that much the worker can do. Okay, so those are the things you need to take into account in terms of your coming up with the contract planning. Okay, so your contract planning basically starts from site possession until completion. Okay, so this is where you have your master program yang initially you have created in pre-contract planning though. So your master program further developed into a shorter term period. Okay, so your master program ni, it cannot be that detailed until weekly or daily basis, because your master program is given to the client. So it is impossible for the client to even want to know from beam to beam ni when is the concreting. Okay, so this will be for the keeping of the main contractor and also the sub bawah dia tu. Okay, so this is where your short-term program, okay, being provided either weekly or fortnightly, so depending on how detailed you want it to be. If you want it to be daily, then you can actually monitor in daily. Okay, so what should be done within these 2-3 days, for example. So the more detailed your duration, your breakdown of the duration, obviously is much easier for you to monitor. So if a certain activity could not be completed within a day and it has delayed, so maybe tomorrow you need to catch up in certain way. So at least you would be able to see where or when your project actually deviated. Okay, so short-term program. It is done by the main contractor to ensure that they have sufficient control over the project time, project cost. Okay, and I did mention subcontractor contributes. Okay, so you need to get the point of view, the opinion from the subcontractor. Okay, so if delay or disruption happen, changes will be recorded in a revised program, and it is called as-built program. Okay, so similar to what we usually call as-built drawing. Okay, so as-built drawing is a drawing that reflects the reality. Okay, so sometimes when designer provide us the drawing, but at the construction site, for example, you need to change certain things. Okay, so you need to change slightly the layout, let's say because bawah tu ada pipeline, for example. So the shifting in location, the shifting in certain dimension, it should be reflected in the as-built drawing. So the as-built drawing will reflect what has been constructed as it is on site. Same goes to this one. Okay, so you have original plan, but you need to be realistic and have your what do you call the as-built program, the as-built planning. So what is the current progress and what has been planned, so it should be recorded as such. Okay, and then you might make your own revision in case you want to plus minus certain duration at a certain place. Okay, all right, so contract planning, the elements to look at, you can see basically all of the elements here would involve during construction. Okay, so you will start the activities as planned. Okay, so you will monitor the progress for each week. If you do it daily, you can monitor it daily or once in 2 days. So it depends on how well or how detailed you monitor the progress. Okay, so you can check on the cost, you can check on the time, quantity, and so on. So you will compare the current progress to standard ones. Prepare daily, weekly, monthly report. So this is important, and I think all or most of the site would have this daily report. Okay, so if you can still recall, or if you have come across daily report, basically is about, for example, it's a simple piece of sheet. Okay, so usually compile a month, and then we make it into a monthly report. But daily, you need to have, for example, how many workers on site, okay, the weather for that day. So it is important because especially if you are required to what do you call, apply for extension of time. Okay, so if you do not have the daily report, you did not report the what do you call, the weather condition at that point of time. Okay, it's quite difficult. Maybe actually it has been raining for several days, and that raining cause you to not execute work on site, for example. So it is a legit reason to be given extension of time, okay, for example, as such. And then to check on the workers attendance and so on, site engineer, how many site engineers on site. So those are the things you actually need to notify in terms of daily report. Material arrival, okay, so when what material arrive on which day, and more or less something like that. Okay, so you will have your daily. And then your daily could be in terms of weekly. Okay, so what has been done throughout the week, what type of work has been completed throughout the week. Okay, so maybe the pad footing for the entire site has been completed. So this is where you actually report, so that you can actually compare to what has been done, okay, what has been planned, and to see where did you deviate. And of course, all of this, at the end of the day, you create a monthly report. Okay, so if you can still recall, usually monthly report, the main thing the client wants to see is the S curve. Okay, so how well your S curve as compared to the planned S curve. Okay, so we will touch on the S curve in the chapter of project monitoring. Okay, so your S curve is the most important item in your monthly report, because that shows whether you are on time, ahead of time, or behind of time. So once from that is where you need to justify why, for example, you are behind of time. Okay, so based on the daily report, you might say it has been raining for a week, for example. So there are certain justification you can actually mention why you are behind time. So all the documentation kat sini basically it supports each other towards justifying if there are deviation from the planned schedule. Okay, and then of course during construction is where you control the resource, the usage of resources. Okay, so you control the quality based on the specification, based on your drawing, contract document. So this is where you control the quality. You coordinate, you discuss with the parties involved. Okay, so main subcontractor, supplier. And then this is where you have contract administration, variation order, for example. So I think we did discuss about variation order, where the work deviates from the what has been dictated in the contract document. Okay, so variation order happens during construction, and if there are any delays, is it possible for you to actually apply for extension of time, EOT? Okay, and of course, all works need to be conducted safely. If there are issues, delay, and so on, corrective actions to be taken. So this is where you have progress claim. So progress claim is usually done once a month, usually end of the month, to check on the progress. Okay, so usually the contractor will come up with a certain progress. So let's say 70%. Okay, but usually it will be counter checked by the QS of the client to ensure that the contractor is claiming the correct progress on site. Okay, so once it is agreed upon, then the progress claim will be approved and payment will be given to the main contractor. Okay, so main contractor once receive the payment from the client, it will go to the supplier and contractor. So that's why if the progress claim is to be reduced a lot, or if the progress claim is to be given delayed, and or worse is not to be given by the client, then your payment to the supplier subcontractor tu yang jadi what do you call, you actually the main contractor could not provide the payment to the supplier or subcontractor if they do not have sufficient capital with them to roll and so on. So that will become issue lah. That will be the issue that actually goes on to projects which are abandoned semua tu. So nasty consequences from there. Okay, and finally activities during project close down. Okay, so these are the elements, if you can imagine, that takes place during your construction. Not all, these are still some of it. Okay, there are so many more activities involved, but these are just some of it. All right. Okay, so the reasons for project planning basically is to monitor your master program in a more detailed manner. Okay, so you have your master program, tapi your master program, it will not be in a weekly or daily manner. You will not be providing that to the client. So as a means or as a tool for a main contractor to manage or to monitor the site, dia kena break down the master program into contract planning. Okay, so which is in a more shorter time period. Okay, and then to plan the site operation in short-term manner. Okay, so similar to what I've mentioned. Hold on, Okay, and then to optimize and review resources, and to keep the project under review and report on any variance. Okay. All right, so we have basically completed on the several types of planning done by different stakeholders. So far, any question? Okay, so if there is none, we'll continue the next. The others are basically it is not that it is factual, but it is not that difficult. So meaning to say that benefits, once you have the plan, you can already think about the benefits. So basically it's a lot to do with logical. So it is not factual in such. Okay, so you can basically think what are the benefits of planning. So planning a project, okay, so there are several steps to it. These are generally the steps that you can do. Okay, so getting a feel for the project. Why is it important to get a feel? So that you have the idea what the project is about. Okay, so to get a feel to, maksudnya you at least have a brief idea what the project is. Sometimes we are given project maybe with insufficient documentation and blindly we get into the project. That is the problem. Okay, because you do not have any idea, you cannot get to know what actually the project is about. So getting a feel, or basically to at least know what the project is about, it gives you an idea how you want to drive the project forward. Okay. Second, establishing key project dates. So if there are contract documents to it, you have the start time, you have the end time. So you are going to determine what are the milestones in between. So milestone here, so key activities, events, and what are the dates to complete each of the milestone. Okay, so accessing how long the activities will take. So of course, when you have these activities, and when you have the project dates, so how long will each activity take to? It will be your own estimation. Okay, so you need to estimate, for example, a foundation for that certain a foundation of pile foundation, for example, okay, would require activities such as pile cap cutting. Okay, so pile cap construction. Okay, so whereby you need to cut the pile and so on. So every activity, okay, foundation, for example, pad footing, the construction might differ from PALCAP using piling as a foundation. It would differ from rough foundation. It would differ from this wall foundation and so on. So every foundation might have different work procedure that you need to know. Okay, so at the undergraduate level, without having seen any construction site or any construction processes, it's not easy for you to actually imagine how to construct a certain foundation. For example, I'm just taking foundation so that is kind of the easiest to just mention. There are several types of foundation. There are so many types of foundation, and the process in constructing each of the foundation is different. So not easy. Okay, if you ask me personally, in terms of knowing the duration, in terms of knowing what activities comes after what, the best is obviously to have the to gain the experience on site. Okay, once you actually if you have a 1 day on site, you will learn a lot of things. All right, so if you are going for industrial training, please make sure that you have what, 8 weeks. That 8 weeks you can learn a lot. Okay, because on site 1 day you can actually view a lot of things. So that could, you can actually basically get back and compare it to the theory, right? Because sometimes in detail, it is really quite difficult for us to basically teach you every single thing in terms of activities and so on. For me, when I did my theoretical, there is not much of basically the relationship going on between the activities. But once I enter the site, one project is sufficient for you to understand how the activity goes. But obviously, it will give you fundamental knowledge on that, but it's not detailed. But at least you will know, okay, if we are going to construct a foundation based on PAL, so what do we need to know? So first, we need to install the PAL, we need to cut the PAL to the length that we want, and then we need to excavate. So those are the activities that will be involved to come up with a PAL cap, for example. Okay, and in terms of rough foundation, so rough foundation will be over the entire building. Okay, so it will be like a slab, for example, a thick slab. So it's like a rough lah. Okay, so that might differ compared to piling. Okay, so rough foundation might not require piling, so it just require excavation of a thick, like a thick slab, and then you have BRC installed, and then you just fill in the concrete. Okay, so hence for this course of study, it is not necessary for you to understand how to build something. Okay, but probably there will be question given to you in the assignment, so that at least you know how a simple structure could be built. Okay, you don't need to know details of everything, but at least a simple structure. I think you might get a better view if you look into YouTube videos and so on. So there are videos which shows you the progression of construction and so on. Okay, all right, so whether so hence in your case, in terms of examination or whatsoever, there will not be any requirement for you to establish the key activities or event. It might be required from you in the assignment, but not in the examination also. Okay, and another thing, assessing how long the activity takes also would require experience. Okay, so a person with rich experience, they would be able to easily tell you how long it would take for a certain concreting work to be completed. But for a fresh grad, the experience would provide you later. Okay, all right, so next, basically you need to establish the sequence of the activities. You have so many activities, hundreds of activities. You can't complete all finish to start. It's impossible. It will take forever to complete. So you will need activities which starts together. You will need activities complete, finish together before you start the next activity. So this is where your sequencing comes into picture, and this is where we are going to touch in the calculation part of the planning too. Okay, and then to decide which programming techniques to be used. Nowadays people use software. Okay, so the most popular one will be Microsoft Project. More complicated one will be Primavera, but in our case we will depend on the precedence diagram. Okay. All right, so benefits of planning, I think is pretty straightforward. Maybe I'll just run through without the needs of going in detail. Okay, so the benefits, obviously, one, to establish coordinated effort. So everyone knows what activities are to be conducted. Okay, so if you have a proper planning, you delegate the task according to the planning, so everyone knows, so everyone could understand the effort. And of course, once you actually have a proper planning, you will reduce overlapping, you will reduce redundancies, you will reduce double handling. Okay, so when you have a proper plan, you can lay out in such a map where you will be able to identify which activity is overlapping with which, and you can eliminate that. Okay, and next, reduce the risk uncertainties. So a proper plan at least give you a certain assurance that okay, all activities are taken into account and these are the time and date to be completed. So at least you know those activities will be carried out. And if there are any activities with high risk, you will be able to actually see it from the planning, from the initial process of planning. So once you lay out, you should be able to see certain activities that might require material from overseas, for example. So all the acquisition of the material could be done much earlier to reduce delay. Okay, for example, as such. So reduce risk, uncertainties to the minimum. Okay, derive procedures to work effectively, establish standards of performance, and provide a structural basis to carrying out the work. Okay, so that's quite clear. And of course, with site benefits of site planning, you would reduce idle non-productive time. Okay, if you plan it to be too pessimistic, meaning to say that your time frame untuk complete certain activity is so long, you will find workers having a lot of time in their hand, so there will be workers who are idle, for example. But if your time frame is quite tight and they know within that day they need to complete certain activities and certain tasks, so you will actually reduce the idle non-productive time ni. Okay, but of course you do not expect the worker to be like a machine working 8 to 5 non-stop, so tak adalah macam tu. So give and take, there are times that could rest and so on, tapi they are working. So rather than you have half a day tapi they are not doing anything, so at least you can view that in a much better clarity lah on site tu. Okay, and then difficulties, shortages will become apparent, will become clear. Okay, so if you have planning, you implement it, you'll be able to see what are the constraint yang obvious. Okay, especially if you conduct your planning in a meticulous way, so you can see what are the risks and what are the potential reasons that could affect the the progress. Okay, so next, management is able to relay what has been done. So this is as the basis untuk monitoring tool. Okay, so obviously when you have planning, you can lay out what has been done, what is planned, so the management will be able to see the comparison. Okay, and it provides for utilization of labor, faster program, and so on. Right. And in terms of construction site, okay, in terms of site base, what kind of planning to do, these are the most common planning that you can do as a construction project manager. Okay, so this is site base. First, you plan the resources. Okay, so proper management of workforce starting from a good amount of workers needed. Okay, so obviously your planning should have sufficient workforce. So you can't force the workers to work 24/7 and expect them to complete within the time frame and so on if it is insufficient. So you need to also see the capability of the workforce to ensure that when they work too, it is not too tiring or it's not ergonomic enough for them. Okay, so proper management of workforce with a good planning. So your planning might include laborers, but as the main contractor, you might not be planning the laborer. Your subcontractor might be doing that, but it's your job to task a certain activity to the subcontractor and provide them with the deadline. Okay, so the start date, the end date, so the supervisor or the subcontractor knows that they have a certain time period, so it is their job to allocate it, delineate it to their workers. Okay, so laborers. And also plant operator. If the plant operator is under your contract, is not under subcontractor's contract, then it's your job as the main contractor to come up with their schedule. Okay, so plant operator, for example, truck drivers, excavator operator, excavation operator, all those tower crane operators. So those operators, if it's not hired by subcontractor and is under main contractor, then it's your task to actually provide them the planning, site supervisor, site agent, and so on. And the goal is basically no one should be kept idle. Okay, and supervision is done to make sure all work is done according to the requirement. Do you still recall when we talk about supervision of the work done? So, and a close supervision is essential, especially when you are supervising workers on site. Not necessarily applicable to engineers, okay, or project managers, because they know their job scope, but and they are more proactive in that manner. So supervision of workers on site, it is necessary. Do you still recall when I mentioned as such as this, it relates to which theory of management? Ingat tak? When I mention something like this, which theory of management that we could relate to? Supervision of workers are important. And when we supervise workers, effectively, the job will be done as what we require. Tak adalah force them to work like a labourer, but at least a close supervision is important. Can you recall which management theory that mentioned about this? It was in chapter.
Mayo.
Yeah. Good, pandai. Good. So basically it's Elton Mayer. Okay, so Elton Mayer mentioned a close supervision could actually get the workers to be on their feet. Okay, so all right. Thank you for answering, and I'm happy that you can answer that. Okay, all right. Next, planning of site layout. Okay, so planning of site layout is important. Kejap Okay, so the reason why it did not mention equipment and time basically is more or less the same. Okay, so planning of equipment, planning of plant basically is how you plan your equipment to be on site. Okay, so especially equipment such as excavator, those kind of heavy equipment. Those kind of heavy equipment, if it's not under your, how to say, it is not under your organization, you have not bought it, and it is under rental, so the rental is daily, so it will be quite expensive if you plan a certain equipment to be on site but underutilize it. It is unnecessary waste of money. So planning of equipment is especially crucial when you are dealing with equipment which are under rental. Okay, because it is under daily rental basis, something like that. Okay, and of course planning of time and cost, it will go back to the detailed planning. We will talk about scheduling and so on. Okay, the next one is planning of site layout, that we will mention it here, and it will not be brought forward into next chapter of our study. So this is the only part that we talk about planning of site layout. Okay, site layout is the layout of your site. Okay, where would you plan, or how would you plan your access? Okay, so because when a site is given to you, either in an urban area where you have close buildings surrounding you, or open area where you a suburban area where you don't have close building. Still, both require good site planning. Especially when you're talking about urban area, you need to be very careful because um, how would you actually conduct a construction in the urban area with minimal disturbance to the people surrounding it, people, the traffic, the building. So if you have something that requires vibrator, for example, will it actually vibrate the building surrounding it, or any demolition? So those are the things. So your site layout depends highly on how your site is. If it's suburban and not much of a traffic, then you'll be easy. Cuma if it's site suburban, you might also need to see where is the nearest electric, what do you call, the TNB point, for you to actually pull in your electricity, your utilities, your water services too. That will be for area which are quite isolated lah. But in terms of urban area, you have different problems. So both ways, you need to plan your site layout carefully. Okay, so site layout is, for example, your access to your site, your route in your site, especially urban area. If there are delivery of this all long reinforcement bar, how would you allow it to enter, and how would the route would be? So obviously, normally we'll make it quite simple in a circular form, and access, exit, and so on, or one access at the front and exit is at the back, so something like that. So depending on, because you have to think that the machineries coming into your site, all the trucks coming into your site is large in terms of size. So your access plays a very important role, and also to minimize nuisance to the people surrounding. Okay. So a badly planned site layout may cause congestion, okay, may cause health hazard to workers and also to anyone who comes into contact. Okay, so your site layout can be the temporary buildings, okay, your workers' quarters, your site office, for example, the arrangement of your site office. So you need to also take into account, let's say your meeting is held at the site. Okay, so your site office plays a huge role. So your architect, your client will be visiting the site office for the meeting. So at least it should be properly built lah. If you can see that if we are talking about low capital projects, the site office biasa-biasa je, it can be in the form of cabin je. But if you're talking about high capital project, the site office can worth millions. Okay, so sometimes a site office can worth 2 million, because that is the value of the project too. Okay, so the value of project can be in billion, for example lah. So your site office will be built as such, you know, having timber flooring, nice timber flooring, and so on. So I've been to a very nice site office, amazingly beautiful site office, and also high in terms of safety. Okay, so Lendlease, there's one company who is doing TRX, so the site office is amazing. And also we have site office which are the common one, which is based on cabin. All right, so you need to also, you need to think about the site office. You need to think about the canteen, workers quarters. So especially now, because actually in the Employment Act, workers quarters is one of the issue that they have actually revised. If I'm not mistaken, it's under the Act of Employment Act something, year 2020, if I'm not mistaken, or 2018. So it is just recent, because if you look into law and whatsoever, usually it has been long, you know, obsolete and so on. So one of the issue that I think has been brought into perspective is the workers quarters too. Sometimes kesian, because they, you know, you have these foreign workers working from morning to evening. Yes, they came here for salary, but you know, at the end of the day, they are still human. They are father, brothers to people. So sometimes kita, in construction, sometimes we do not value that much. We do not really see them, you know, actually working for us. We nampak them as a worker, okay, they are paid to do the job. But you know, at the end of the day, without them, the building is not being constructed. And you know, certain things macam tu lah. Sometimes I think in construction, what is lacking will be the humanity too. Okay, because I'm not saying all. Okay, so of course there are people who actually are more having such empathy, but I think that is one of the thing that you know, give us the, how should I put it, give us the value of being a human. You know, they work really hard, seriously. And lepas tu their workplace or their place of staying is horrible. It can be so horrible, okay, dengan dengue and so on. So you know, being an engineer, you, or being a project manager, we have certain limitation, of course, but still we should treat human as a human lah. I think that's one important thing. Sometimes during your in the degree study, not much being mentioned kat mana, because we don't have this room to mention, or we don't have room to actually discuss on being a human. So I think kat sini lah we can just selit a bit just to, you know, just to give the, you know, just be, they are humans. So I think that's very important, and that is one of the main points actually when we look at overseas emphasis on safety and health. Okay, so when overseas, when they're trying to sell the idea of trying to ensure the safety and health of people working on site, they draw back to the point that, you know, people who are working on site, engineer ke, it doesn't matter lah, anyone. But if you're based on site, you risk your day, okay, you risk every single day going to the site, and one fine day accident happens, and the next thing you know, it's just done as it, someone died and life goes on. So cuma people who have that, you know, family members, someone's children, you know, that gives impact to them deeply lah. So of course, because sometimes construction we talk about hundreds of workers, so satu tu tak nampak nilai dia, but that satu, you know, probably is the provider for the family balik back in their country. So those are the things that we actually need to think about lah, rather than going back to the progress, yes, the productivity, but still the safety and health is one of the issue. So actually when we are talking about site layout, one of the important things, not only in terms of the delegation of the layout, tapi in terms of how you can ensure your workers or people nearby would be safe and would actually, you know, enable job performance. Kalau tak, you have to close the site and so on, you know. So the recent accidents semua tu, so those happen for a reason. So those happen due to certain errors. So those happen if you go through the investigation, things are not being done as it is. So who would be accountable? So sometimes the investigation goes on and not sure where it ends. Okay, so but the person has already passed away. Okay, all right, so the next thing that we might also want to say, okay, I did mention temporary buildings as such, temporary road. Okay, so temporary road here, material storage area. Okay, so especially if you need a storage area which are close, which is like close hut or whatever. If no, it could be left open, for example reinforcement bar, but it cannot be left too long. If not, it'll be corroded and so on lah. So you kena brush off leceh sikit. Okay, temporary drainage as well. Okay, so besides temporary road, you need to have temporary drainage, you need to have this sediment pond, hard standing for material areas. Okay, and also access sundry point. Ni basically lah, sundry point is something like a canteen, for example, for workers. Okay, all right, so it's important to make sure that the site is accessible all the time to ensure that your production can run smoothly. Okay, so just a little bit more for us to cover up. So I wouldn't go very detailed on your scheduling because moving forward from here, that is what we are going to do, scheduling. Okay, so we will just run through, and also I will not go detail on control because moving forward we have one chapter on control. Okay, but just to give you an idea, when we are talking about scheduling, it is about putting a number to your plan. Okay, so schedule, it is about time. So your schedule must have a number, which is the operating timetable. Okay, so you have the activities. It is called a schedule once your activities are given the time frame, given the duration. Okay, all right, so the basic approach for scheduling is a network diagram and so on. So if we will go detail in the next chapter on the network diagram. Okay, so benefit of successful scheduling. Once we go through it, you will see that if you have a proper schedule, it will give you the interdependence between the activities. So what activity depends on what activity needs to be finished, and then the next activity starts. Okay, so it gives you the interdependence. It gives you the time frame when your resources must be available, because once you put in the schedule, your activities will be given with time frame, the start, the end, the start, the end. So with that time frame, you should be able to allocate your resources well. So with schedule, it will give you proper communication between subcontractor, between supplier. Okay, so you will be able to determine the critical activities, and obviously it could affect clients' expectation with the given milestone and so on. Okay, and how do we conduct scheduling? Okay, so we will start with a work breakdown structure. Okay, we will estimate the time frame. So work breakdown structure. Okay, so what I want you to do before the next class, try to Google work breakdown structure, WBS. Do some read up about that. Okay, so I need everyone to Google what is work breakdown structure and get to know about it. So we'll discuss this in the next class. Okay, so, or if you can find a simple work breakdown structure, what is that? Okay, so work breakdown structure is important before we can come up with a schedule. This is where you actually break down your activities into small, break down your project into smaller activities. Okay, and then scheduling, estimated time required, sequence the activities. So this one will go in detail in the next chapter. Once you have the schedule, you implement the schedule, then you monitor and control. So monitoring and control will be one chapter on its own after project planning. Okay, so we'll go on to that chapter in that. So, and in general, to close up on planning and scheduling. Okay, so at this moment, what I need you to know is basically just the first, second, or first, basically first step, establish the objective. Okay, and also coming up with a plan. So to identify the activities, we need to know work breakdown structure, we need to know the activities, we need to know the areas and so on. So this will be touched a lot in the coming chapter. Okay, sequencing, duration, so this will be done a lot in the coming chapters, so it is not necessary to explain here, I think. Okay, all right, so and with that you are done on this theoretical part. Okay, same goes to here lah. Okay, so you perform schedule calculation, revise and so on. So all of this will be done in the subsequent topic until monitoring and control will be the topic after project planning. Okay, so we do not need to dwell about this. And with that, we conclude the theoretical part on project planning. Okay, so the next class will be on scheduling. How do you construct, or how do you come up with the network? What are the different types of network or relationships and so on? Okay, all right. Any question on this part of the project planning? Any question from the floor? Dah already pukul 3 ya. No question?
No.
This is like macam terlalu clear until no question ke? You guys
Don't know what to ask.
don't know what to ask. Okay. Let us can we just have another 5 minutes, just think of some question. I'll just randomly call a name. Sometimes bila randomly call a name, you have some good question. Okay, so just take 1 minute to think of something. We'll randomly get someone, because I think in previous we did ask and I get good question, which I think is good, and everyone would have a good access to the question. Okay, let's try Encik Khairuzan ke? Khaizuran. Mr. Khaizuran, are you here?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, can you have like one question for us?
I'm still thinking about a question.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
Ataupun we have another one. Let's try Muhammad Anas. Muhammad Anas ada? Cik Muhammad Anas?
Ya, saya.
Any question? Ada tak soalan that you can think of?
So far saya tengah fikir.
Doctor,
Okay.
can I ask you a question?
Okay, Muhammad Ami, please do.
Okay, on the previous lecture, you actually mentioned on SDG.
Okay, correct.
Okay. So, how well do companies in Malaysia apply SDG goals into construction? Like, how to maximize the 17 points of the goals?
How to maximize it? In terms of implementing or adopting SDG goal, most of the listed in Bursa tu, okay, so all those listed companies might be doing it. Okay, so you can see all those companies macam Genting, Sunway, Gamuda, you might see on their website that they are embracing this SDG, because that actually highlights their commitment towards sustainability. But if you're talking about construction per se, because 90% of our company in construction, SME, so they are not really into that. So smaller companies, all those sub companies, they will apply SDG if the client requires them to, if the client dictates them to actually conduct SDG. But as a proactive manner, how well? Not really. But if you're talking about large organization, they might have a department actually doing SDG. Okay, so for example, in terms of environment, so they might be doing all these green building index, they might be indexing themselves against green building. So that is one of the way they can actually say that, okay, we are doing green and these are the things we are doing. So we are installing facilities which are green, we are doing project with green initiative, so those things macam tu. So reducing emission, we are trying to use equipment with less carbon emission. So that might be some of the initiative they're doing. So in terms of social, for example, they might be mentioning that they have this collaboration maybe with WHO, for example. So, or you know, to reduce all those poverty. So there are initiatives being done. So to be honest, large organizations, yes, but smaller organizations, they might do it following the instruction of the main contractor ataupun the developer. Okay, but it's good, do some reading on the SDG, because I did mention and you need to know at least what are SDG. So you can see that from there, SDG or sustainable goal, it must, or it incorporates the environment, it incorporates the social, it incorporates the economy. Okay, so and there are goals that we are trying to address in that sense. So usually organization tak adalah cover entire 17 goals, how many goals they have there. Maybe there are selected ones. Okay, so rarely that a company can address all those. So every industry might have different goal that they actually address. So tak adalah 100% addressing, but some portion and it will be highlighted by them lah. Biasanya dalam their website you should be able to find their contribution. Okay, Amin?
Okay.
Alright, so I think we can end the class here. It is 3:05, so we'll get back to Kaizuran too in the next class. So please everyone remember so that Kaizuran would have a question
Okay,
in the
madam.
next class. Okay? Alright, so with that we'll end our class today and I thank everyone for your attention.
Thank you, Doctor.
Alright.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you,
Thank you,
doctor.
Doctor.
Thank you, 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 Dr.